And welcome to this week's episode of Supply Chain Talk. I'm Alistair Charlton, your host today, and our topic this week is on tips to successfully digitize your fleet. I'll be joined by my guests in a few minutes, and first of all, though, we will be talking about a news item of the week. And as always, your comments are very welcome and questions in the chat and Q&A panels, and we'll pick up on those as much as we can. So let me bring on my guests, and the first guest is Yuri Pinto, who is Gerente de Supply Chain at Indorama Ventures. And I think Yuri's been there until recently, but in fact is now head of supply chain in a consulting startup called RxLog. And Yuri's worked mostly in Brazil, but also sometime in the Far East. He has 27 years of experience in logistics, supply chain, purchasing, operations and sustainability, and manages high-performance teams in the various companies he's been at. And he's also an expert in Lean Six Sigma programs for innovation and continuous improvement. So welcome, Yuri. Our second guest, who is not with us right now, but may hopefully join us if he can just overcome a few technical connection issues, is David Sommers, who's Managing Director at Road Skills Online. And I hope David will join us. He's managed his own haulage fleet for many years, following a career in the British Army, and he's provided risk management and training services to transport and logistics operators for over 30 years. And his company now includes e-learning for driver behaviour as one of its services. My third guest is John Lowe, who's Fleet Systems Manager at Travis Perkins PLC. Travis Perkins, for those of you who are not aware, is a large builders merchants, plumbers merchants, so a lot of branches, almost 900 branches across the UK, and several thousand vehicles delivering a lot of heavy materials to their customers. And John's managed the group transport systems at Travis Perkins for 10 years, and his team is also responsible for the group's compliance and efficiency reporting. Welcome, John. And finally, Thomas Becker is a sales engineer for enterprise at Samsara. So he's a solutions engineer there covering large major accounts in the German-speaking market at Samsara. He's been working on digitalization and driver safety strategies with various accounts in different industries for the last 4 years. So a great panel representing lots of different parts of the world as well. But let's first of all look at the news item that we wanted to focus on first of all, which is titled "The Top Floor." It's a tongue twister. The top 4 fleet technologies identified for 2023. It was published in Fleet Industry, and the company Teletrack Navman has identified what it thinks will be the top 4 technologies in the coming year, and those are artificial intelligence in transport, growing uptake of smart cameras across fleets, the switch to electric vehicles, and finally driver safety. So they're quite related, and the article kind of talks a little bit more about how AI and machine learning as a platform can really help businesses streamline processes and so on, but also ultimately identify inefficiencies to boost their productivity. I guess things like vehicle scheduling, but also AI and machine learning can help improve driver behavior, and that's where I think the smart cameras come in. So very much a related item there. So smart cameras being taken up just means obviously going beyond cameras which just can record, but which actually where the data could be analysed. And David, welcome. You've overcome the technical problems. Great to see you there. So we'll be talking about smart cameras and driver behaviour soon. Continue those trends. The plugging in electric cars is another heading in the article, and it talks, I think, particularly about the pickup of electric vehicles in fleets, and of course a very different sort of cost profile, very different maintenance profile to think about. So certainly a lot of implications to electric vehicles, including of course in vehicle scheduling, because suddenly you've got very different considerations in terms of range and recharging times and so on. So quite a mixture of items identified there, and perhaps Yuri, turning to you first. Actually, if Yuri is there, I can't see him on camera, but let me ask Yuri the question. Which of those 4 trends do you think is the most important for 2023, in your opinion, Yuri? If there is no answer from Yuri, let's turn instead to David. Have you got a view, David, on which of those four trends?
Yeah, based on my own experience, Alistair, as a haulier, I was collecting data before we had digital data collection, and we did it by steam-driven methods like writing down numbers and encouraging drivers to write down numbers and reading tachograph charts and calculating miles per gallon. So, the ability of data to transform a business goes back a long way before digitalization. And I think what's happened is that digitalization gives us all the opportunity to accelerate the pace at which we can make interventions into running a business for greater efficiencies and my special subject, greater safety. But irrespective of whether you had manually created data 30 years ago or artificial intelligence created data in a digital fashion today, it only starts to work if you actually speak to drivers.
Right.
And
Okay.
I find a lot of articles talk about telematics giving road safety data, which gives great data, but it has to be used. And most transport managers don't have the time, I'm afraid, to write training or coaching programs. And often we confuse the two words, training and coaching. They're not the same. And what we want to be the outcome of whichever is chosen is learning. And it's the drivers who need to learn to behave in a professional way.
Okay.
And I also believe, sorry, we all just very quickly then, Alistair, we also have data from the Department for Transport every year in their road casualty report, which we do an executive summary of. And the 10 main types of collision and the 10 main causes of collision and contributory factors are all in that report, but how many people use it?
Okay, no, thank you, David. It sounds then as though potentially that artificial intelligence to really be able to analyze and point out trends and so on could be very powerful in your mind. Yeah. John, of those four trends identified, which one catches your eye most, do you think? Oh, you're on mute. Thank you.
I agree with David. The data tells you or gives you the insights, of what the drivers are doing on the road. We don't sit next to them every day. But actually, it's that communication piece to the driver to explain where potentially hot spots are. Okay. But also, I don't think that data is the 100% the thing that you need to do. You need lead drivers. You need peers, drivers with other drivers out on the road. Right.
Okay. That's interesting. So certainly the driver safety aspect is really important to you. Thomas, let's move to you. Kind of those trends. Would you agree with the other two, or do you want to introduce some?
Sure. No, sure, Alistair. I think it's already hard to pick from four topics. So keep it with those four. But I also have to pick the driver safety in conjunction actually with the smart cameras, because I don't really see them as two different topics.
Yeah, very well.
And I'll pick them because I think they can have the biggest impact overall on everybody, actually, not just the customer, not just us, because ultimately, if we work on increasing the road safety, that benefits us all, right? David just went back to that report. And I think for a second, we all thought during Corona, it's all fine, because obviously the accidents went down because there were fewer miles or kilometers driven. But in most countries, we're back at least to the same level of before, if not higher. So I think that can have the biggest impact on all of us having safer roads.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. But let's just pick up on electric cars, on electric vehicles, especially for fleets. I mean, I perhaps let's go around each and turn. Do you think 2023 is going to be a year when you're going to see a lot more electric vehicles in fleets, and does that have a big impact? I've certainly seen a lot of electric vans now in cities more and more. David, do you think they're going to be a big impact in 2023, and what does that mean for driver behaviour, road safety, things like that?
Alistair, I'm certainly in the corner that backs reduction of CO2 and other noxious emissions in towns and cities. Again, I grew up at a time when no one even gave it consideration. Walking up to the after-school job, we were clouded in the emissions from diesel trucks going through the town where I lived. We took it for granted, but now there's clear evidence of the harmful effect of those. So actually, I don't know too much about the transfer of the pollution by having electric vehicles made and the batteries produced elsewhere. But what I do know is that it's a good step for our societies to not have ICE engines churning out fumes in cities. Although I must say, the idea that you have an emission-free zone is a bit of an anomaly, because of course you can pay to go into it. So is it emissions-free, or is it just the start of a journey to where we will truly have an emissions-free?
Yeah.
And I suppose the trend of incorporating practical electric vehicles into fleets will continue this year without question. Yeah.
Right. John, how about you? I mean, can you share with us, has Travis Perkins already got quite a lot of electric vehicles in the fleet, and are they going to be more?
I wouldn't say we've got a lot. We've got some.
Yeah.
We're on that journey to go to electric vehicles. Vans are very much easier than the heavy side. So we're on that journey already to convert with one particular brand. Heavy side, we're on that journey. I think manufacturers are starting to bring out the heavy side vehicles. Again, specialist vehicles that we have to run, like other people in our industry. Are they quite there yet? Yeah, they are. Have we dipped our toe a little bit? What I think we do need, though, is we actually need more data from the OEMs. So from the DAFs, Scanias, Mercs, all of the above, Volvos, because you've got to fit that vehicle into a business that is already running ICE vehicles. So there is that challenge, really, to convert.
Yeah.
And make sure that they will fit.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. Interesting to hear that. So, and Thomas, in your work, are you seeing more and more of your products being fitted into electric vehicles, electric commercial vehicles, rather than ICE ones?
So that's a topic that every customer has to deal with, or every prospect. They are all on different parts of that journey. Some of them have clear strategies already. Some of them are very much at the beginning. So the first question is actually, and that goes a little bit back to what John said, like, which cars can I actually electrify? If I look at my fleet of 5,000 vans and trucks all together, which of those actually have the right profile to be electrified with the current conditions? And that's something, I think, going back to that digitalization and to that data aspect, what we also try to do from our perspective, from some Samsara perspective, if we have a customer and they're already feeding our system with data, what we do is we actually have an electrification report, and that electrification report tells the customer which of those vehicles are best suited for electrification, to basically get them started on that first step.
Okay.
Journey. But absolutely. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yuri appeared and tantalizingly has disappeared again. So Yuri, if you're there, just butt in and say, hey, I want to make some comments, but I'm afraid for now we'll move on. But before we move on to our main topic, we've got an interesting question from Amol Jain. Thank you, Amol, about electric vehicles and essentially saying with that being part of our focus, how are we dealing with Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions, especially when you start going way back up the supply chain and think about lithium mining and so on. I don't know if one of you wants to comment on that. Do any of you get involved? I don't know, John, on your compliance side, are you involved in Scope 2 or Scope 3, or just literally focusing on the vehicles that you're running?
Just the vehicles that I'm running, I'm afraid. I can't comment on that one.
Okay, David or Thomas?
Well, I would actually be interested to know some of the answers to those questions, because I don't think there's too much information publicly available about how the raw materials are sourced and how they then used, and what waste is created in that process. And it's knowledge I think we should all have access to. Yeah.
And Thomas, is that something you get involved in
Yeah, I mean, generally, just for the broader audience, maybe some people also aren't really aware of what it is. Scope 2 and Scope 3, broadly speaking, are indirect emissions, right? Rather than having the vehicle on the road and actually emitting carbon. It's wherever in your supply chain, in your end-to-end, where are things also emitted? Like David said, that could, for example, be the production of the EV. There are gases being emitted while doing that as well. It's difficult. I think that needs to come from OEMs, right? The OEM knows where they're producing, where they're sourcing materials. So if you're talking about the production of a vehicle and how that rolls into your emissions report, that should be coming from the OEMs. But one thing that I just want to create a little bit of awareness of is maybe there's very often this discussion of, okay, EVs are just offloading emissions from the road, from the direct emissions to the indirect emissions, which is to some extent true, but also sourcing oil, for example, that's also not a clean industry, right? Also, if you're using vehicles with combustion engines, you also have indirect emissions going into the lifetime of the vehicle. So yes, to some extent, there's this discussion going on, especially with mining things like cobalt or rare earth materials. But that's not just exclusive to EVs, actually. But yeah, generally speaking, I think this should come from the person or the party that actually created the product and delivers the product.
It's a really good point, isn't it? And given that the lifetime of a battery is known, its expected lifetime, and therefore the energy it can get through and the number of charges and whatever, you could calculate quite easily, couldn't you, the sort of grams of CO2 equivalent per mile that battery drives a vehicle. It certainly is something that could be calculated, and it'd be interesting to see if the vehicle manufacturers pick up on that. John, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I think the interesting bit about what Thomas just said as well, is my vehicles are not a standard vehicle. So I have a crane bolted onto it, I have a tower lift put onto it. So again, I've got multiple suppliers that I've got to go to, not just the OEM, to find out that information. My cranes come from Sweden. They've got to get over here, etc. So it is an interesting topic, and finding all that information out.
Great, thank you. Well, it sounds like it's one for another episode of Supply Chain Talk in the future. But let's now move to our main topic of tips to successfully digitize your fleet, and we've covered some of this already. But the first sort of sub point we had on today's topic was about combating driver shortages through AI dashcam protection, coaching programs, and supporting good driving behavior. So I think we'd all recognize those three points mentioned there do definitely help drivers perform better. They've got reassurance, they've got protection and so on in the case of accidents. But I guess sort of in terms of specifically helping driver recruitment and retention to combat driver shortages, David, is that something you see as being a benefit of good driver training and good behavior programs?
If I may, Alistair, I'll start a bit further back or higher up, whichever way anyone wants to look at it. And I think what contributes to good driver retention is actually engagement with drivers, to use a modern term that's used frequently. When I started in transport, it was just talking to them, and operators didn't talk to drivers very often, other than to remonstrate with them or give them delivery instructions. And I don't know to how much, to a great deal of extent, we're not moved from that even today, because that's the core activity. So I think the first step in creating good driver behavior is explaining to people, again, based on my own experience and working with hundreds of companies since, is explaining to people what you want them to do and how you want them to do it. So create expectation and create standards by that communication, so that people have an idea of what they're buying into if they work for you, that employer. And they know what's expected. And there's some notable companies, not the least of which is John's company, who have excelled at that over the last 10 years as a specific business strategy to improve their business, as well as to improve the welfare of the drivers and the impact on the public who come into contact with them in the course of their work. So I think there's all these facets to good driving behavior that have to be addressed. It's not just about the data. In fact, the data is possibly the last thing in the line when you start to measure the impact and the outcome of the engagement with drivers to retain them. So however you engage with drivers, I think it's a contribution to retention, and we're getting that feedback from our clients who are using our e-learning program.
Yeah, great, John. So David was mentioning Travis Perkins is an excellent example. So I mean, do you have some of these programs in place, and dash cams and so on, and is that helping engagement?
We don't have AI dash cams, so we do have dash cams, but really for mitigation on when we have an incident. So I'll step that to the side. But retention of drivers, exactly what David said. Actually, my drivers are the face of Travis Perkins. They are the people. They are the public see those every day. They don't see the people beyond the counter in the head office. So it's actually engaging them, isn't it, and making them feel like they are part of the wider business, because they do spend most of their time out and about on the road. They have to reload, they're back out again. So we've got coaching programs, we've got incentive programs as well. So we take telematics information of how the vehicle's been driven. Okay, so safety and efficiency, and then we incentivize our drivers. So actually, if you drive our vehicles to an A grade or B or a C grade, we'll incentivize you monthly. Why that was put in was retention of drivers. We spend a lot on our drivers every year training, course training, CPC training, etc., clocks. We want to keep those. We don't want to just keep wasting money. So actually giving them that incentive has retained them. I was speaking to at a dinner I was at an event last week, and a company I was speaking to, their turnover of drivers is 1.8%, and I was just like, wow,
that's incredibly low.
I want to go and see that person. I'm going to have a meeting with him because I want to find out what he's doing. So hopefully I can take that back to my business. So that's really how we're retaining our drivers and coaching them.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Thomas, I mean, certainly in the UK, there have been major driver shortages. Partly, I mean, a lot of factors, but certainly partly, I think, being driven by Brexit. So a lot of European drivers who were happy to live and work in the UK are no longer here. Are there equal driver shortages on the continent in German-speaking markets? And are you seeing these technologies helping retention?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if those drivers left the UK, that doesn't seem like they just magically turned up in Germany. So we also have tens of thousands drivers in shortage every year, and it's getting worse because there is a great deal of older drivers basically retiring in the next few years, and there's just very little younger drivers coming back because most people don't see this as an attractive job anymore, right? And I think in Germany, it's even a bit worse. John, you're probably 2 steps ahead of most customers that I'm talking to, because we're a little bit back behind the whole dash cam curve. And in the first initial reaction is always, if I put in a dash cam into my vehicle, I'm not going to find any drivers anymore. My drivers are going to leave me. They're just going to go to the next transportation and warehousing company. So it takes a minute to actually educate them that the main point of a dash cam is, yes, to coach the driver, to engage with the driver, but also to actually give him a helping hand, because no driver goes out. If let's say we're talking about a two-way facing dash cam, no driver goes out and says like, okay, I'm going to use the phone because I want to actually be in an accident. It's just a bad behavior which has been learned because it hasn't been punished. Because thank God, not every time when somebody is on a phone in a car, it results in a crash, but obviously it increases the risk. So there's a behavior which has been learned. So this is one thing, to actually engage with the driver and make him understand why we do this, and also give him actually some assistance. John, you mentioned that you use your dash cams mainly when there has been an incident. I think almost every driver has been in a situation where he's been accused of actually being at fault in an accident, but in reality, maybe a passenger vehicle just cut him short or something like this. So you can actually tell those drivers, hey, you can just ring us up. We have the video in the cloud. We have clear proof. A lot of that goes along for a lot of drivers, and that's also one of the reasons why a lot of drivers actually have their own dash cams in their trucks, right? So there's a lot of education going on, but the general problem is the same in the German market.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, Thomas, and that relates nicely actually to a question we just had, another question from Amol, thank you, which is basically saying, kind of, is there any way to measure a happiness index of drivers and a way to benchmark against market standards? So perhaps I'll go going around to you again, David. Are you aware of some of your clients having a happiness index, a sort of satisfaction survey for drivers, and do they compare it to other companies to see how happy their drivers are?
I'm not aware that anyone's specifically doing that in a measurable way to gain an outcome. However, funnily enough, I have just recently drafted what you might call a happiness survey.
Right.
Which when I get round to finishing it, one of my colleagues will prepare it for sending out to all our clients to invite their drivers to complete that survey. And it actually is a survey about how satisfied the drivers are. I have to say, with being part of an e-learning program, but B, how it reflects on their perception of their employer, who is providing that learning opportunity.
Okay,
I think there's definitely scope for that. That's something for 2023 to maybe come back to you with, Alistair. But I suspect John will have some feedback for us on that.
No, absolutely. Well, that's very interesting that you're absolutely planning that, and it will be fascinating to hear the results. Yeah. John, did you have employee satisfaction surveys specifically for your drivers?
So we do. Well, we have a company wide. So everybody does one a year. Okay, so it's your voice, our future. Okay, but actually, the company that I was mentioned earlier last week, they actually ask their drivers every morning, "How are you?"
Goodness,
which I thought was a great thing to do.
Yeah.
I also have the ability, but I haven't done it yet. Okay, so on any given morning, I can send a video or a message to 2,000 plus drivers, and I can know that they've watched the video. Okay. And that bit where David just said about that, how are you today? You know what I mean? That bit, I think that's that bit, that next step where we will hopefully go, okay, to ask the drivers. And if they're not, actually get the manager to have that conversation with the driver, isn't it? A happy driver is a safe driver at the end of the day. We do have the 10 before 10 as well, which is 10 minutes with all the staff at the branch before they open. Okay, to have that conversation. How was people today? Did you sleep well, etc. And they are engaging bits, and it reduces accidents.
Yeah, very interesting. I guess interesting to also at the end of the day say, how was your day? How are you feeling now?
That's it again. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So how did you start the day and how did you finish the day? Isn't it? I think, isn't it?
Great. Thomas, with your many clients, are you seeing good measurement of happiness? And I think what would be fascinating is do you know any of your clients who had a happiness survey before putting in dash cams and afterwards to kind of show that they're not resented, that actually the drivers get used to them and welcome them, and it makes them happier drivers?
It's actually a very good question, and I don't think that any of my customers or prospects actually actively measures this. And now that it's mentioned, it's even it all connected a little bit, because ultimately it's employees. Drivers are employees, right? And in the industry that I've been working in for a long time with an IT background, this is actually a very standardized process. We have something which is called NPS, Net Promoter Score, or Employee Net Promoter Score. And this is something which is basically measured for all IT companies, like for all big companies. So you can actually make it very comparable. And that's ultimately the important thing, right? Because it's a good thing if an employer actually measures this, but it's even better, at least from an employee perspective, if the whole industry has a standard for it. So it's an interesting thing, and honestly, I've never thought about it, but yeah, for everybody that wants to implement something like this is in their own company, I would really suggest to look at this ENPS or NPS measurement, because the idea of it is to measure the engagement of your employees in different ways, and to also make sure that they don't need to fill in like a 50 pages questionnaire. So it's also ultimately a really short questionnaire. I would just suggest maybe look into this to also find a standardized way.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, Amol, thank you for a great question. It really sparked a really, really good discussion there. Excellent. Good. Let's move on to the second key point we had on the agenda, which is reaching your sustainability goals through monitoring and analyzing real-time conditions. So I guess that can tie into all sorts of things, but I guess, also into efficient vehicle scheduling and things like that. David, what are your thoughts on sustainability goals through monitoring and analysing real-time conditions?
Well, again, going back to my earlier days in the industry as an operator, we were taking some first steps on sustainability back then, but didn't know it. We didn't realise it. We just called it getting better MPG, and the reason we did it was to save the cost of diesel, cut the cost of diesel. So that's when I began introducing incentives for drivers related to performance, but supporting them with the coaching is to learn what they needed to know to change their own attitude in a self-development way, to recognize that the behavior traits they had, which they thought were good traits, but getting good progress on their journeys, actually weren't good traits, because they weren't making a difference to journey times. They were just consuming more fuel to get to the next stopping point more quickly, and then they lose their time at the traffic lights or wherever it was. So, I guess now you prompt me to look at it. I've been in sustainability for about 30 years, but most of those years I didn't know it. It was all about business performance and driver performance and rewarding drivers. But I don't think it's the same journey. And ICE vehicles are with us now in the majority and will continue to be so for some time. And if we refer to the question we were asked earlier about the secondary pollution, then whatever fuel we end up using, it will be good practice for all social as well as business reasons to actually use less of it, won't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you make a good point that actually, while sustainability is the term we're all used to now, I mean, it goes hand in hand. If you're an efficient business, filling your vehicles, scheduling them really well to minimize distance traveled and cover all your customers, that's all about getting the most out of your vehicles, and it's sustainable. So they absolutely go hand in hand. John, in your case, do you do do you do a lot of some monitoring in real time? I mean, that's sort of part of the point here is real time conditions. Are you constantly monitoring, diverting vehicles, saying don't go there, go here because we've seen something happening, or is that just make life too complicated?
I wouldn't say diverting vehicles from A to B. What we do look at is very much trending. So looking at the utilization of the branch. We do use our telematics data to obviously wheels turning. So what time are they leaving the branch? What time are they coming back to the branch? How long does it take them to reload? How many reloads they had during the day? And then we give them an efficiency score percentage of utilization based on an 8-hour day, a 9-hour day. You can choose that as a business. So we've got multiple businesses within the group. They run at different times of the day. And then they can benchmark each other. So actually it became, or competition probably isn't the right word to use, but again, it because of the various businesses that we've got, it's again, that bit of a competition of utilization. We've got vehicles over here that are being used more than vehicles over here. Okay, do we need to move some vehicles? We've got too many vehicles at some branches that are struggling at other branches where they've got 100% utilization, could really do with another vehicle. That's where the information of this reporting then assists the business really. Place vehicles in the correct place.
Yeah. Okay. So interesting. So definitely monitoring vehicles is really important, but in your case, you think the real time is probably going a step too far. And I certainly, if a customer's expecting a vehicle to be delivering a load to their construction site at 9 a.m, it's not much use to say, oh, the traffic's a little bit busy, we'll come to you at 11 instead. It doesn't do you many favors.
No. So we do that bit to the customer that says, like, this is when your delivery's coming. And it will dynamically update if there is traffic and tell you, etc. So there is that bit. Do I need to tell my business real time, hour by hour? No, because it's locally managed.
Okay, interesting. Thomas, are you seeing many people monitoring and analysing real-time conditions and sort of changing their vehicle routings, or kind of trying to change behaviours, literally real time?
If we think about outside conditions like weather, like traffic, etc., I don't really see it a lot, and I think it's also really difficult because the moment you react to it, 1,000 other people also have already reacted to it. So if we just take like the classic one, like okay, the also famous autobahn is blocked, or there's heavy traffic on it, and at this moment in time, maybe an alternative route would be quicker or more efficient. Other people will make that decision as well, right? And I think we've all been in that situation where we then took the diversion and the road was blocked as well. So I think it's difficult to make decisions, especially for a higher efficiency or sustainability, depending on that. Where it is more relevant is the safety aspect, because we can, with AI dash cams, we can start coaching and responding to the driver in the moment, in real time. Let's say a driver unconsciously or for whatever reason is actually tailgating permanently. We can actually tell him to please leave this, or please increase the distance to the following to the vehicle in front.
Yes.
Which again has nothing to do with efficiency or sustainability. Actually, it has with efficiency. And that's where we see a lot of customers actually using real-time data without actually any intervention by human, but by AI.
Yeah. And does that real-time data now extend? Because I've seen demos of your products, and it is fascinating to see them in action. Does that extend to also monitoring, for example, the weather? So suddenly it sees, oh, look, there's rain coming on the windscreen, increase that distance. You may have been safe 10 minutes ago, but now the roads are wet and so on, you need to increase that distance. Is that a feature yet, or is it maybe something planned?
It's not yet a feature. It's interesting, but there's so much things we can still do with the AI, and it's an ever evolving model. So we're basically, and that's the beauty of our business model. We're basically constantly releasing new features. So if you invest into the system today, you will have lots more features in a year or in 2 years. But yet, to be honest, haven't heard about the weather conditions yet. But it's an interesting idea. But I think there are a few things higher priority for us right now.
Okay, no, good. Let's move to the third key point, which again, all quite related, and that's getting the right vehicle data for a smooth transition from internal combustion engine to electric. So I guess we touched on that a little bit. I think, Thomas, you mentioned it, didn't you, that to help customers identify which vehicles might be the appropriate ones to move to electric. Let's start, David, with you. Have you seen particular data which would sort of help companies make that transition?
I haven't seen data, but it seems to me a fairly straightforward question. The more localized your operations, the more practical it is to introduce electric vehicles, because they haven't got the range difficulty. They'll come back to a base at the end of every working session. And then the longer the journeys are, the heavier the vehicles are going to be to make a more efficient use of payload capacity. That's always been a given. And if you've got a bigger, heavier vehicle going longer journeys, you've got a bigger recharging problem to solve. And I think that's fairly clear within the industry, which is why we see home delivery and inner city deliveries moving to vans at the moment, but not longer distance ones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. That the small urban vans with lots and lots of parcels, the payload's not great, the distances are not great, a lot of stopping and starting, perfect for electric. John, which I guess leads to you saying, John, you've started on that journey. Is there particular data that you're finding is more useful than you expected, or less useful for thinking about use of electric vehicles?
So I think these are the considerations as well that we've got to think about. Okay, so I can have an electric vehicle at a branch. Okay, so if I have one van, that's fine, isn't it? But like what David said, if I've got heavy side, I've got 5, 10 HGVs. It's the amount of capacity that I've also got at the branch to charge those vehicles.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
these other parts that you need to also think about. So the whole journey isn't just about, my average vehicles probably travel, I don't know, anywhere between 150, 200 miles a day. Okay. They'll come back to the branch twice, maybe 3 times a day, 30-minute recharge. Yeah. Okay. I can get a quick, fast charge, isn't it? But it's when they all come back at night and then I've got to charge them all up at night for the next day.
Yeah.
It's the consideration, I think. And it's the infrastructure as well around the country.
It's a really good point, that, because, you know, if you're talking about 10 heavy vehicles, I mean, even if they're not fast charging, that's a heck of a power output. And there's, you know, you might need a new substation, you know, nearby. You might have all sorts of fire and sort of, you know, risks to then consider if you've got that amount of power and heat. And it's a big thing, isn't it?
And again, it's not just the trucks, is it? You know what I mean? I've also then got electric forklift trucks as well that are charging. So again, you've got another bit there that you've got to consider. So I think there is multiple aspects that you need to think about when you're on that journey. Yes, if you've got one vehicle, very easy. Yeah. And you know it's doing local deliveries. It's only traveling 50 miles max, probably there and back to do one drop. But again, you've got to analyze your data, and getting more data from the OEMs, I think, is the key of how many cycles has the battery got? Have I got a battery cell that's got a problem with it, et cetera, isn't it? And bringing that information in to ensure that the vehicles stay on the road.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. Because that's the one thing you can't have is, like, you've got 10 vehicles and 2 of them haven't managed to recharge yet. So and we're seeing that in governments, certainly in the UK government, the whole kind of targets for, you know, charging points, you know, throughout the motorway network and throughout towns and cities. If you haven't got your own driveway to charge up your own car, what are you meant to do? It's a massive challenge, and it's similar for commercial vehicles.
The interesting one that I've seen, I think it's a Dutch company. They're obviously, they don't want to go digging up the roads to put the new infrastructure in, so they're dropping batteries, basically battery packs, so that you can plug your car in. But actually, it's more efficient to take the battery packs back, charge them up, bring them back out to charge the cars up. Why haven't we thought of that in this country? Isn't it? You know what I mean?
It's an issue, man. You immediately wonder what the vehicle emissions are of the vehicles delivering and collecting the batteries, but hopefully there's enough density.
Hopefully they're electric as well.
Yeah, absolutely, but it does introduce, you know, there are a lot of different challenges around electric for sure. Thomas, what are your thoughts on that journey of how you identify, you know, when and how to move to electric vehicles in a fleet?
I mean, first off, obviously, it's as I said, it's a journey, right? So you're going to start off with a few vehicles. It helps if you know which vehicles to pick. If you have the data yourself, great. If we can help you, even better. And then things like John mentioned, if you have the first few vehicles, charging infrastructure usually is not the big issue. But it will become, because as soon as you're starting to charge hundreds of vehicles on sites or even dozens of vehicles, you will need to somehow also control that. And it's also something we are going to do. So we already have, in conjunction to this first step, where we try to help the customer, which vehicle should you start with. We also monitor the charging behavior. So which car or which vehicles are charged where and when and how often to which load. And ultimately, the idea behind this is to actually have the ability to have an influence on the charging infrastructure as well. So connecting our dashboard to the charging infrastructure as well, to make sure that the right vehicles are actually prioritized in charging, because not all vehicles might leave at the same time in the morning, but there might be specific vehicles where we know they need to be fully charged in the morning. So that's a journey. And I think, yes, right now we're not at the point where HGVs are generally a consideration. I've actually attended last year's International Automobile Conference in Germany, And it was the first time for 2 years because of Corona. And the general sentiment was that the industry is going towards that, right? There are also obviously other technologies in play. In Germany, Mercedes-Benz and a few other manufacturers, they now want to create that charging network around the autobahns to recharge trucks while they're on the road or while they're actually resting. And I think there will be a critical point for HGVs because at least, I mean, and there are side cases, of course, I appreciate that, John, with special vehicles, with different types of deliveries. But if you look at the classic long haul, it is very predictable. There is a critical distance. And when we're able to actually cover that distance in a fully load, we're at the point where we can actually switch to HGV EVs relatively easy. We just need to make sure that those HGVs can also generally be recharged because we have a limited amount of hours that every driver can drive, right? So there is this point, and I think we're probably a few years out, but we will see more and more. And then there are also experiments. So in Germany, I think I saw that in the UK as well. There are a few tracks where they actually get the energy from above, very much like some trams.
Yes,
which is obviously also a smart thing to do. So you can actually recharge your truck on those kilometers, and then you just need to make sure that you're able to actually travel the distance in between. So a lot happening on the HGV side, but we're getting there.
Yeah, no, it's a great reminder that there are some really good solutions out there. And I have to say, it occurred to me when I was last staying at a big business hotel, thinking there's 200 cars parked in the car park, and if they're all wanting to charge on, not super fast, but on the 7 kilowatt per hour, to be able to charge up overnight, that's suddenly, like a megawatt of power needed for that hotel, in addition to all the guests kind of having their showers and bars in the evening. I mean, it's a massive impact on the infrastructure sometimes. So very interesting point raised there. We're coming to the end of our time, but let's have one final question to each of you, which is, with our main topic, if someone is thinking about digitizing their fleet, where do you think they should start? So, David, for you, what do you think, given all the many topics we discussed today, where do you think someone should start on all this?
Well, I think the use of the digital data that's already available is paramount, and that can only be put into action by educating your drivers. So I would say, one of the biggest pieces of feedback I've had in 20 or so years of consultancy is we don't have time to get face to face with drivers often enough to make a difference. So I would adopt 21st century technology and bring some e-learning into the business to educate drivers to learn that being educated is part of doing your job. It's not something extra that you do over here. It's part of how you learn to do your job and do the right thing in every aspect, both business efficiency and safety. So there are organizations like Thomas's who are providing excellent data now. That data is there. You can see what your performance is like. So I would say if 2023 you want to make a difference to your business, educate your drivers and use e-learning so it becomes a practical solution.
Great. Okay. Thank you. John, how about you? Where do you think people should start on this journey?
Cool. It all depends on what the business needs, isn't it? I think my kind of my background is IT originally. I wanted to bring us into that digital age, connect my systems, etc. Get a load of data, analyze the data, then present it back. Does everybody have that capability? Yes and no. I don't think, though, that if you've already got a standard process that you should automatically digitalize it. Okay, you need to look at why you want to digitalize it. Okay, there's various needs for myself and for our business. We have local management. I can't see all of my branches around the country. The only way I can see it is by digital data, so that I can identify places that I need to help.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like getting that data in is a common thread there. And Thomas, finally from you.
I would actually like to point out two things which I think are pretty important. One is get everybody on board. I've seen some digitalization projects going horribly wrong if there was an intent to digitalize something and the leading part of the company didn't involve all the other parties. So the people that will actually enforce the process, like drivers, for example, so pull everybody in from the beginning and rethink your processes. So don't just take your process one by one and try to digitalize it one by one. Try to get an outside look and see how you can actually improve that process, make it more efficient by digitalizing it.
Great, thank you. Well, look, those have been some really great points we discussed today. So just to conclude, Amol, thank you very much for those two excellent questions. One of them really got a good debate going there. So a Supply Chain Talk mug will be on its way to you. Our next episode is next Wednesday, 22nd of February at 4 p.m, same time. And we're going to be looking at the very important subject of how can you eliminate modern slavery in your supply chain. So I hope you can join us then. So thank you again very much to my guests. A thank you to Yuri in his absence, who battled to try and connect, but wasn't able to. So we'll see him another time, I'm sure. David Summers, Managing Director of Road Skills Online, John Lowe, Fleet Systems Manager at Travis Perkins PLC, and Thomas Becker, Solutions Engineer at Samsara. So thank you, all three of you, and all four of you, in fact, with Yuri. And we'll see you at our next episode.